The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the EuroSTAR Live Speaker Showcase. Our fourth presenter this week is Kristoffer Nordstrom, and he will be presenting why every system test department should have a test developer or two. To join the conversation, if you have any questions for Kristoffer, or if you want to just discuss the content of the webinar, you can do so over on Test Huddle. We've set up a discussion there for you, and I'm just going to share with you the link to this discussion, and you should see it pop up there in your little chat box. I'm now going to hand you over to Kristoffer. Hello, Kristoffer.
Hi everyone, thank you Derek so much. I hope everyone can see the screen properly here. First off, I'm real glad so many people registered for this webinar. I'm really psyched to do this presentation today. So as Derek said, I'm going to talk today about the role of a test developer and also why they are a really good complement to basically any test department. Now, one caveat first is that depending on how far your company has come in Agile adoption, some of the things I say today may or may not apply that much to you. Specifically, if you're a tester in a development team, well, you have development skills all around you. But having said that, we have a lot of companies who still have system test departments consisting of only testers, so I'll be talking about that today. You can find my little handle at the bottom, and let's get started. So first off, I just want to take a minute here to mention who am I, who speaks here today. And I am absolutely passionate about software testing. I eat, read, and sleep software testing. Quite frankly, I do. And as you can see, I've worked in different industries and contexts for the last years. I've done testing in anything from telecommunication systems to distributed cloud computing to embedded systems. So I come from a technical background, and when I try to describe myself, I normally say that I am a test developer who loves to automate checking. And some of you might at this point react and think that, whoa, loves to automate checking? Okay, this is just another developer who thinks he can solve all the world's testing problems by test automation. I'm not going to listen to another word he says. Well, fear not, my friends. I am a test developer who loves to automate checking. Reason I do so that testers can focus on quality human testing. Because quite frankly, there are still too many testers out there who are forced to run the same manual scripted test cases over and over again every week in the same way. Test cases that quite frankly should be automated by now, that are easy to automate. And the reason I want to do that is so that these testers instead can focus on quality human testing, or sapient testing as some people calls it. So that's really all I'm going to mention about myself today, so let's get on with the presentation. First off, a real quick outline here. I am going to talk about what a test developer is, question mark. We're going to look at some challenges that our industry faces at this point in time. Why do we want a test developer? What are the potential benefits? Are there any potential risks in hiring a test developer? And where do you find them if you want to recruit one? Now, if you got them, how do you boost them? And last, we are going to cover what is a test developer, exclamation point. So that's the outline for today's presentation. And let's start with the first question. What is a test developer? It's a fair question to ask since we don't see the role that often in our industry. I haven't run into that many people who call themselves test developers, and there are actually only a few people that does this, in my opinion. Other companies call them developers in test, and there's all sorts of other titles, but a test developer is, as the title implies, a developer. So that means that this person, he or she, has to be very skilled at programming. They need to know about software development. They need to know how to write good code, how to automate stuff, and they need to know how a computer basically works, how software behaves. But on the other hand, they also need the mindset of a destructive tester, and even the skill sets. Because we know as testers that being a tester, you have a certain way of looking at software. It's a potential victim. We want to break it. We want to see what potential secrets it has. So a test developer needs, on the one hand, to be a developer. He needs to be able to write good software. But on the other hand, he or she also needs to understand how to take it apart, how to break it. And that means that the test developer really stands in both camps. He or she stands both in the programming camp and in the test camp. And this means that a lot of times, myself included, you feel kind of insecure. You feel insufficient compared to a real programmer. You feel you're not as good as a real programmer because they can focus 100% of their attention and study time on being a really good programmer. And at the same time, you feel insufficient in comparison to real tester, because the testers can focusing on becoming good testers, exploratory testing, observing risks and analyzing, all that. So it means that you always feel that you're struggling to keep up with both of these roles here. Now, on the other hand, a test developer is someone who stands in both camps. The test developer is someone who can speak both with developers and testers. So that means, and I frequently do this, I can talk with the developers about bugs on a software level, on the code level. And I can go and talk with the testers as well, and we can discuss it from the testing perspective. So I am also one who bridges both these camps and can act as a mediator in between. There are some challenges today that we are facing as an industry. First one, test departments with only testers. Wait, what? What did he say now? Yes, we do have test departments that consist only of testers. And, well, let me refine that a bit. That's not a problem in itself, of course, because test departments need to do testing. And in order to do testing, we probably need a tester or two. So that's fine. However, any test manager worth his or her salt knows that you need a divergent skill set and divergent type of people in a test department. We don't want the same type of people there because then we don't get different test ideas. So as an extreme, if I were to have a test department consisting only of white, male, 26-year-old, just graduated out of university, I probably wouldn't get as a divergent testing activities as I would have if I had young people, old people, people with a technical background, people with a non-technical background, people who knows how to do UX, design, people who knows how to program, etc. We want as many different persons as possible in the test department, and a lot of times today test departments consist only of testers. Today it's a de facto standard that we have an agile pace of delivery. It's very, very rare that I encounter a company and come in and they say, yeah, we're still kicking it waterfall style. Don't believe in that agile fad. Everyone's doing agile more or less today. And that means that most companies try to speed up their pace of delivery significantly as well. It means that they want to deliver working software every 2 to 3 weeks. I've even heard of companies who do it once a week, and in some extreme cases who just ship it on the same day. System test departments have a history of previously spending a lot of time preparing for the testing and then executing testing and then reporting the results. And guess what? It's no longer okay for a test department and a test manager to say, yep, we are going to need all the features in advance that you're going to develop. We're going to need 1 month of test planning. And then we're going to need about 6 to 8 weeks of running through all our scripted manual test cases, and then you can get the bugs back and you can fix them and we can repeat the cycle. It's just not good enough these days. So we need to be able to keep up with the agile pace of delivery, and that's a challenge. Why is that a challenge? Well, as I just said, traditionally there are unfortunately a lot of scripted manual test cases out there. People are still executing them. Now we still need regression test cases, don't get me wrong. We still have those really important critical test cases that need to be executed every time. Do we need to do it manually by a person repeating the same test steps over and over again every week? No. Those test cases are prime candidates for automation. But in order to do automation, we're going to need some development skills. Someone is going to need to be skilled in test automation and how to do development. And where do we get these skills from? Well, as a test manager, I can of course go to the project office and say, I need a couple of persons to help out with test automation. Do you have a couple of developers I could use? And at that point, the project lead, of course, faces the dilemma of I can delay the product a couple of weeks and get better test automation coverage. Or we can focus on delivering earlier. We all know what's going to lose out 9 times out of 10. Another thing you can do, you can try to get individual developers to help out, but they also have commitments to their own Scrum teams. They also have work to do 8 hours a day. So it's going to be really hard for you to get help from elsewhere within the organization. So what do we do? What's the solution to this? We hire our own. We hire our own people who actually know how to do test automation and how to write software and can help out with this. And that means that we need to put out ads, we need to search for these people, and that can be kind of tricky. But it would be worthwhile, and stay with me and you'll see the benefits of hiring a test developer to your test department. Now again, a disclaimer, I would not want to have a test department consisting solely of test developers. That would not be a very good solution, and for the same reasons I mentioned before, we want a divergent test team. So why should we hire test developers then? What are the potential benefits to doing that? Well, the first one, this might seem a bit crude, we get dedicated man hours. This is actually more worthwhile than it might look like, because at this point we are not borrowing a resource from another team for a couple of weeks or a month that can any time be yanked off the project and back into the development team. We have hired a person who we can actually decide as a test manager and a test department what's most beneficial for us to solve right now. Is it to develop automated test cases? Is it a test tool that we need developed? Or is there something else that he or she can help out with? And we get to do long-term planning as well, since this is a person who is recruited by our department and under our budget. Other thing, test automation. I mentioned this. This should not be underestimated. If we're going to keep up with the agile pace of delivery, we are going to need to have some test automation in place. I am not advocating 100% test automation and 100% coverage. That's just silly. But we still need to have some test automation in place in order to reduce the load on the testers so that they can do quality human testing. Another thing that test developers can help out with is reproduce complicated bugs. Now, if I find a bug where I press button A and error dialog B pops up, that's fairly simple to reproduce, right? Just write a bug report saying press button A and error dialog B will pop up. But then at other times we will encounter some more sophisticated and complicated bugs. Like for instance, if I run the software for 30 hours straight there is a 1 in 3 chances that a stability bug might pop up. Now, the odds of that happening is not very high. On the other hand, it might be that we have a bug here that's very serious. Every time this bug actually pops up, it might wipe the whole customer database or something, which makes it a very serious bug if encountered. And as a tester, if I go to a developer and say, hey, you know what, could you manually run this software here for 30 hours and you have a 33% chance that the bug will pop up. I'm not going to be very popular and it's not going to be very prioritized. Having a test developer, on the other hand, can help in different ways, such as either automating the whole exercise of the software for 30 hours, or the test developer could even look into the code and start seeing, well, this is where it happens in the code, so probably we could speed up the progress of reproducing it quickly, or include other valuable information to the developer that could help them. Another thing test developers can help out with is compile open source tools. There are a lot of really good testing tools out there, especially if you're working on any type of Unix system. The problem with those are a lot of times they need to be compiled and built because they're delivered in source code format. And testers, we are not that proficient and comfortable with setting up the build tools and the whole build chain and compiling our own test tools from scratch. Any test developer who knows what he or she is doing should be able to do this quite easily, actually. And once your test developer has built the open source tool for, let's say, Red Hat Linux or something, you have pre-compiled binaries and you can distribute them within your test department so that other testers can reuse these binaries later. And finally, one other very good area to have help from a test developer is non-functional testing. So if you want to do any type of serious non-functional testing, we are going to need some sort of automation, some sort of tools development. When I first started out at a system test department and I got responsible for doing performance testing, this was a company called UIQ Technology. We did embedded software for smartphones. And we had these huge reference boards with a display where you could basically run our software on it. And we could start the different applications like calendar, agenda, contacts, etc. And what we would do then when we did performance testing was I would take a stopwatch in my left hand. In my right hand, I would have a pen and I would tap the agenda application and I would at the same time start the timer. And once the agenda application had loaded properly to the UI, I would stop the clock and would see how long that take. Now that's not very finely granular measurements. It's not very scalable as well. You still need a person doing this. So what you really need to do, and what we did later on, was we started instrumenting the code so that the code actually reported into a log file saying, all right, I've started loading the application now I've finished loading the application, and that way we could have very exact measurements down to millisecond level. If you're going to do non-functional testing, you're probably going to need some sort of development skills involved in that. And I am mostly referring to here to stress, reliability, performance testing, that type of stuff, not usability testing. Some specific examples of what a test developer could help out with quite easily. Well, first example I want to show you today is data diggers. A lot of the time when we do testing, our system have log files. These are text files basically on our server where the software under test prints out log statements. In this case, it's incoming SSH connections, it's CPU utilization, etc., etc. And we can kind of follow this with the timestamps there and see what happens throughout our testing. Problem is, it's not very uncommon that you have multiple log files in different places. Could be even on different servers. if you're doing some sort of complicated testing in a distributed system. And at this point, as a tester, I have to observe both these log files at the same time and trying to sync them up and see what happens when I perform my test case and try to make sense of why I encounter bugs or not. What a test developer can do quite easily, and I've done this before, is you just whip up a real simple Python tool, Perl tool, or whatever is your device, and you can actually start searching for text strings to appear in log files. So we could look, for example, for memory allocations, deallocation, and we can look for other stuff that happens in the system at the same time. Now our script in turn, when it finds these strings, can quite easily print it to a dedicated terminal. So I would, as a tester, while I'm doing my testing, I would have a separate terminal basically printing out interesting information from these two log files as I'm doing my testing. And this greatly reduces the feedback time for me to actually see and observe that when I do this, that will happen in the log files. And if you have a good test developer, it's very easy for them to actually write this tool in a reusable way so that you can have command line inputs. So as a tester, instead of hard coding and saying you're going to look for allocated, deallocated, and refilling account, we can instead just send in from the command line different keywords that we want to monitor for. And we can also send in different files that we want to look in so that this tool becomes usable for the whole test department over time. And this kind of tool is really easy to whip up. It's probably easy to do, so you can do it in 30 to 60 minutes without any problem. And I helped out some friends over the years. We have, for instance, Alexis Tulonen, a Finnish tester, contacted me. We had a discussion about this, and we quickly whipped up a data digger tool to kind of look over his web server testing. Another example of something you can do is you can create a watchdog. What's a watchdog? Well, if you're doing any type of testing in a distributed system, you might have several servers. You are going to, as a tester, start testing towards a web user interface or some other source of input. And messages are going to flow throughout the system between the different servers. Now what can happen during your testing is that a server might go down, right? That's a bug. That's what we want to happen. But if we have multiple servers set up, we might not notice it immediately. This could be a redundant database backup server that just went down, and we might not notice it until afterwards, like 10 minutes after our test case, and see, oops, the secondary database just went down. I wonder when that happened. I wonder why that happened. And as a tester, you now have to start backtracing. You have to start trying to remember, well, the system logs on this server indicates that it was 10 minutes ago. What did I do 10 minutes ago? Let's look over my exploratory testing notes. I think I did this. Wouldn't it be much better if we could get immediate notification of when the server was down? It's really easy to write a small script that just watches this server. It could send network pings, or it could just make a simple request to a REST API or whatever. It's a watchdog. It's going to monitor that server, and as soon as that server goes down, it's going to notify you as a tester. You can have this running in a separate terminal as well, and your watchdog program is just going to say, oops, secondary database just went down. And if you have a good test developer, they are actually going to set the watchdog to monitor all 5 servers in this test setup here, so you get notification if any of this goes down. So that's a watchdog. It's really easy to concoct. Some other cool ideas that test developers can help out with: dashboards. Managers love dashboards. This has to be one of the coolest dashboards I've seen in my career. This was actually at Ericsson in Karlskrona. A department there had taken some monitors, and these are drawers you see here, which they placed with their back out in the hallway, and they just installed some simple light bulbs there, green and red, which they connected to their daily build system and to their automated tests, so that whenever something failed, a red light bulb would light up. And as I said, this was placed smack in the middle of the hallway, so everyone saw this. Managers, project leads, developers, testers, everyone. And it started to raise questions. Oops, the automated tests have gone down. Let's fix it. You got immediate attention on this. So having dashboards visualizing interesting information to your department is something really cool that you can get help with. If we look at some other examples, automatic provisioning. As a tester, I tend to spend a lot of time provisioning the test environment, installing the servers, making sure that the test data is in place, loading the database, configuring everything, and it just takes a lot of time. It's time consuming and it's boring, and at times, guess what, I make mistakes as a human. This can a lot of times be just scripted or automated for a test developer. Could be as simple as you write a small Python script that copies new binaries and test data over the network to your server and copies it into the right folder. So instead of having to open up your FTP client, dragging over the files, you could just run your script from the terminal and it would do all this for you. Slightly more sophisticated, you could have your script or program reset application configuration. That could be XML files, config files. It could even be that we reset the databases. So before we do any type of testing, we do a database dump, we store it in another place, and once we want to reset it, we just load the database dump into place again. And that could also be easily automated. Virtual machines, those are really cool. There are some really good software out there today that you can use to run virtual machines. I always have a setup of VirtualBox on my Windows machine where I can run any type of different Linux machines or something else set up in a network configuration. There are some other cool technologies coming as well. You have LVM, Linux virtual machine, and you have Docker, for instance, which is runnable instances of applications, where you basically take your application and your system and you put it inside a virtual machine. And that way you can spin it up, you can shut it down, and you can reset it to known states as well. And that really greatly enhances and speeds up your testing setup time. If you want to go really fancy, there's concepts like PXE booting, installing the operating system over the network cable. A customer does that. They basically have virtual machines that starts up, and then over the network cable they send out a network request basically saying, does anyone have a boot image for me? At which point the PXE server responds back saying, yes, I have a boot image for you. It sends that over the network cable, and then the virtual machine installs the operating system into the hard drive, and the next time it boots up, it boots from the hard drive instead of the network cable. So some really cool technologies here to basically automate the provisioning of your test environment. And all of these require varying degrees of effort, of course, to apply. If you're gonna go Hackster style, there's some fun stuff as well. Once I worked for a company in California where they developed their own distributed compilation tool, and they had their own virtual file system that they implemented in Linux. And at one point we did a code review, and we noticed that we had a piece of code that looked up all the files under a folder called /proc, which is basically Linux way of representing different processes as files. So you can look at the files and folders there. You can see all the processes that are running. And our code was making a list of all the processes, and then one after another it went through these folders and looked at some information there. And what we saw there was that there was this potential problem that the minute time in between that we loaded the whole list of all the processes or folders in the file system and the time where we actually read the content, a process could be finished. So we would try to read something that didn't exist anymore. Now, reproducing that or testing that hypothesis is really, really hard because it's very, very timing dependent. So we probably could have tried spawning 100,000 threads doing this and just hoping that an error occurred, that we had a pure chance of luck encountering that, but that's not a really good way to do it. So instead what we did was I had a test case running, and it basically exercised our production code. And our production code then called the GNU C library and the function readIr, which in turn did a system call down to getDens, which fetched all the entries basically from the virtual file system. And remember that this code here is running in privileged Linux kernel mode, so any crashes in here are really serious, so we don't want this to occur. Now, what I did instead was we created something called an LD preload. That's basically us injecting code into the system and saying, no, before you are running libc readIr, you're going to preload my own function here called override readIr, which in turn is going to call readIr. And then I had to write a loadable kernel module as well who overrode the getDens. And this way we could very easily reproduce the problem there, and we actually noticed that we had a kernel panic occurring when this very rare event occurred. But still, it was a kernel panic, so the whole system basically shut down. Now, you might think that, well, this must have taken a lot of time, but actually it took just 3 or 4 hours, as I remember, to implement this. If you know about the techniques and the technology, it's most of the time not that hard to do. It's just that you need to be aware of how to do stuff. So I've talked about some cool benefits and some examples of what you can use a test developer for. Aren't there any risks? Well, of course there are. Some of the potential risks with hiring a test developer is you will actually get less manual testing time because you're hiring a person to help out doing development of test tools. And that means that he or she is not going to be able to spend as much time doing manual testing, so to speak. They should still do it. A test developer should still do testing together with your testers in order to keep up his or her skills in testing and to see what potential problems and pain points your testers are facing on a day-to-day basis. But the fact of the matter is, it's a test developer, and he or she is mostly interested in helping out developing stuff for the testing. So they can't be doing manual testing all the time. If that's a problem, you should have hired a quote-quote normal tester instead. This, on the other hand, might not be a problem over time, since you are basically investing time with your test developer in developing more efficient test tools that probably help your testers and reduce the time it takes for them to set up the test environment or to reproduce bugs or to create test data. So over time, you will probably get this back again. You have the team within the team risk. Now, if you're going to hire test developers, 2 or more, it's very tempting, and it's actually a good idea to put them in a team of their own, a test development team. And that way they can basically help out as a team developing test tools and doing test automation. But you have to be a bit careful because you might foster the culture that the test development team see themselves as something other than the test department. They might see themselves as we're kind of better than these testers because we can do development as well. So you need to be a bit careful that you don't create two separate entities within your organization. One way to do this is make sure that your test developers hang around a lot with the testers. You should take your test developers and send them out and doing testing for a week together with your testers and have kind of a rotation schedule or something so that your testers and your test developers hang around with each other a lot. Another risk is that they're not working focused enough. If you're not steering them, you could end up with a test development team that kind of does what they want to because no one has real insight into the work. So you need, as a manager, to make sure that they have a clear product backlog, clear prioritization, and they know what is most important for the test department at this point. Remember, these are developers, so they like doing development, and it's always fun to pick the interesting problems over the boring ones. So having stuff like Scrum or Kanban or something in place where you can prioritize their work and make sure that they're working focused will always help. Another risk I just recently added to this presentation is develop over reuse. It's always fun to write new code. As developers, we know this. It's fun to write something new. And at times, quite frankly, you don't need to do that. There are perhaps good open source tools in place or other free tools available, so you don't need to write your own solution for it. But that's a risk you might encounter with test developers, that they prefer to write their own tools over just downloading something that's free from the internet. A way to address this is if you have several test developers in a team who can kind of keep tabs and check on each other to make sure that they're working in an efficient manner and don't goof around and just develop their own stuff because it's fun. Also, you might want to consider having a type of mentor program or having developers from other development teams coming in and helping your test developers, because the test developers are going to be a bit isolated, they are going to be a bit alone, and they're not going to have that many people to bounce ideas with, to get feedback and to learn from. So you want, as a test manager, to make sure that they are connected with other development teams so they pick up stuff from developers. Also, the type of person I just described is a very strong one. That you can get a lot of value out of this person and they can really help out. One risk is that the test department starts to rely too much on one team or person. Oh, the test developers will help out with that. Oh, the test developers always compile our open source tools. Oh, the test developers can do that. You should make sure that you actively try to spread some of the knowledge from the test developers to your testers. Compiling open source tools, as an example, well, it's actually not that hard to do, at least if everything goes according to plan. So your testers can actually learn from your test developers in how to compile a new version of the network monitoring tool. Now, if they encounter a problem, then they can go to the test developers and say, hey, could you help me out here? But a lot of stuff, testers are really smart. We can also learn and do stuff. And finally, when you're working as a solo developer or a solo test developer, it's really, really hard to keep up the quality of your work. If you don't have peers who inspect your code, who does code reviews, you kind of get sloppy a bit over time. And this goes basically for any type of role that works in isolation. It's just the same for testers who work alone. If you're a solo tester, it's kind of tempting at times to take shortcuts and perhaps not do your best possible work. And it's the same thing if you're working remote. If you're working remote from another country, let's say with other office hours, and you're working from home, as an example, towards California, you might at first go down on the first day to the office, and say, all right, I have my suit on, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do test development today. But the next day you might think, a suit? Really? I'm working remote towards California. I just put on a t-shirt and some jeans instead. And the next day you might start thinking, well, brush my hair, shave? Really? No one's going to look. Let's just turn off the webcam. And over time, yeah, bad things happen. So that's kind of what happens when you're working as a solo developer as well. If you don't have anyone looking in on your source code, on the stuff that you're developing, you might start taking shortcuts, and the quality of your work might not be that good actually. But assuming that I haven't turned you away from hiring a test developer by all these potential risks, they are only potential after all, you might ask yourself, where do I find a test developer? I want to hire one. This sounds like an awesome person. Where do I recruit one? Well, you have a couple of options here. You can either hire your own, and that would mean that you need to put out ads in your local newspaper or on the internet, and you would need to write a pretty good recruiting ad, because these people are not that common. It's really hard to find people who are genuinely interested in both development and testing. But you can still hire your own, and there are some really good books out there on how to do good recruitment. Or you can train your own. That would mean that you would in-house take someone who wants to become a test developer, and you would basically tell them, well, take your time, learn the skills of the trade, and become a test developer. In which case, you could either take a developer who expresses the genuine interest in becoming a tester and say, all right, I'm going to take you in and you're going to learn some testing skills as well, and you're going to function as a test developer for my test department. Or you can train from tester. After all, there are a lot of testers who are interested in learning scripting and programming, and you can actually give them the opportunity to pick up some programming skills. You just need to be a bit careful that to make sure that they really get the time to do this and that they really have an interest in learning this. Or the final option is you can train from student. You can take someone who is freshly graduated from university in computer science or something, and you can train them into becoming a test developer, which would mean that you would have to invest time in both them learning development skills and testing skills as well. That's a really long-term commitment in doing that, but it could be very worthwhile in doing that. So if you have one, how do you boost them? Well, if you have test developers, odds are, first of all, you have set aside basically a head count or more in these people, and you want to make sure that they are as efficient as possible. So how do you boost them? Well, one thing that's really good is to make sure that they work in a structured way. I'm a huge Agile freak. I love Agile way of working. So I work both in Scrumban and in Kanban. But just make sure they have a structured way of working. They have a product backlog which you as a test manager or as a test team prioritizes for them and saying, well, we need this test tool right now, or we need to have these test cases automated. And do not forget to put in things like retrospectives. I love a retrospective because it's a really good way for a team or person to improve over time and to look inwards and see what could be better. Another thing to boost the efficiency of a test developer is to make sure that they're connected. Make sure that they are connected to your testers so that your testers feel comfortable enough going to your test developer and saying, hey, I have this problem. I have to spend a lot of time setting up the test environment every time. Could you perhaps help me writing a script in doing that automatically? Or that test developers can ask your testers and say, what's your current problems? But also make sure that your test developers are connected to the developers in your organization. Because working as a solo test developer, again, it's very hard to stay up to date with the current trends and new techniques and new tools in programming. So make sure that they have natural a natural network of developers within your organization. Bug bashes. I love bug bashes. They're a really fun event when basically the whole system test department or even the whole company gets together for a day and says, all right, we're going to have a bug bash and we are basically going to try to test the system today and find as many bugs as possible. This is a great opportunity for your test developers to do both networking with other testers and developers, and it's also a great opportunity to observe how people are testing the product and what potential problems they encounter as well. But finally, the most important or efficient way, in my opinion, in boosting a test developer, tinkering time. Set aside regular time for your test developers to just tinker, to play around, to learn new stuff, to read a new article or pick up a new programming language or something. But make sure it's scheduled time in a regular fashion where they can just play around and learn new stuff. It's a fantastic way of boosting the efficiency of people around you. If you haven't heard of it, look it up and read about it. It's really good. So I think we arrived basically where we can take a stab at trying to define what a test developer is. So a test developer in a role description is, first of all, someone who is 1/3 tester. And that means that a test developer needs to be really good with stuff like exploratory testing. They need to know how to do test case design. They need to be aware of what non-functional testing is and how to do that. Test automation, basically how to break software, stuff like risk analysis. So the test developer needs to be a good tester. But they also need to be very good in development. Means that they need to have at least a programming language. And actually I think you should as a developer know at least a couple of programming languages so you have a broader point of view when you reflect on stuff. You need to be aware of scripting languages. Personally, my favorite is Python, but there's Perl, there's shell scripting, there's all kind of stuff. And you need to make sure that they know how to whip up a really quick script for test tools. They need to be aware of how an operating system works. They need to be aware of how a file system works, how memory allocation works, and they need to be aware of solid, good programming. They need to be aware of design patterns, how to write good, reusable code so that you can look at the code in 2 years' time and still make sense of it. And they need to be able to help out with debugging because they're probably going to help your testers in debugging these tricky to reproduce bugs. And finally, they're going to have some personal skills as well. They're going to need to be an excellent problem solver. That's basically what you do as a test developer. You solve problems every day. And since you're standing in both camps talking with both developers and testers, you need to be a good communicator. You need to be able to talk with people. You're going to have a passion for learning, picking up new stuff, because you're going to be very broad and divergent. So you are going to want to learn more about testing and programming. And they're going to form a tight partnership with the developers in the organization if they're going to succeed. And lastly, they need to have the mentality of they are serving the test team. They are there for the good of the test team to help them in their day-to-day work. So that's a role description. 1/3 tester, 1/3 developer, and then there's 1/3 of some really sought after personal skills as well. So, to summarize, we just went through the role description of a test developer. We had a look at what some desirable traits are. We took a look at some potential risks if you hire a test developer, all addressable as we covered. And then we also covered a lot of potential benefits, and I really hope you've been inspired into either recruiting a test developer if you're a test manager, or if you're a tester or developer, I really hope you've seen that the role of test developer can be a really fun career path as well. But all in all, I would say that a test developer helps your test department run just a little bit more smoothly. Thank you. And if you have any questions, head over to Hesthall. Derek.
Hi, Kristoffer. Thank you very much for that presentation. Let me just open up my screen here again, and we will go through one or two slides. Okay, you should see that there now. I'm just going to share with you the link once again to attend the Q&A. And you should have it here now. So there's the link in your chat box there, and that'll bring you right into the test huddle discussion for this webinar. There will also be, for those of you who attend the conference, you can attend Kristoffer's presentation on Wednesday the 26th, entitled Gamification, How to Engage and Get Help from Users of a Test Framework. And we'll have another webinar tomorrow, which will be the last of our webinars this week, and that will be with Anne-Marie Sharrett. She'll be presenting disruptive testing. And we have 1 week left for you to avail of our super early bird offer, where you can save up to €430 on your conference ticket, and you can make even bigger savings when you register a group where every 5th attendee goes free. So we're just going to finish the webinar now, and we'll see you all over on Test Huddle, where we'll go through your questions. Thank you again, Kristoffer, for that presentation, and thank you all for attending.